He had it all: fortune, influence, and a stunning girlfriend. But everything changed after one unexpected dinner. Across the room, he spotted his ex-wife, and in her arms was a child who looked strikingly like him. What he said next will leave you in shock. Hey, where are you tuning in from today? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Maxwell sat at the table, his eyes focused on his beautiful girlfriend, Lily. She was sitting across from him, her eyes bright with excitement, oblivious to the storm brewing inside him. He had been planning this evening for weeks. Tonight was supposed to be special, the night he would propose, the night he would ask her to share his future, to be the mother of his children, to build a family together. He had every intention of making it the perfect moment. But as they sat there, surrounded by the elegance of the restaurant, the soft hum of conversations, the clinking of fine china, something distracted him, something he hadn't expected. Across the room, his gaze caught sight of a familiar face, his ex-wife, Claire. She moved gracefully between tables, carrying a tray, her uniform in stark contrast to the opulent surroundings. A small part of him froze. It had been years since they last spoke, years since their marriage fell apart. Their relationship had ended in bitterness, in silence, after her struggle with infertility, something they had never been able to move past. Claire's womb couldn't carry a child, and for Maxwell, that was the end of their dream of a family. It was the end of their marriage. But tonight, as he watched her serve the high-end guests, his heart clenched. There she was, standing in front of him, her face older but still carrying the same quiet strength he remembered. And then, he saw it. A small boy, no older than 2, sitting quietly at a nearby table. The boy had dark, tousled hair and deep brown eyes, the same eyes as his. For a brief moment, the world around him seemed to stop. His thoughts raced, his heart pounding in his chest. The child in front of him looked exactly like him, like his reflection, his twin. His mind began to spin. Could it be? Could this child be his? He had always been so focused on building his empire, securing his future, ensuring he had a legacy. But now, it seemed everything he had ever worked for, every plan he had made, was slipping through his fingers. The one thing he had longed for, more than wealth or power, was a child. His son. His eyes flicked back to Claire, and for a moment, their gazes met. A flash of emotions flickered across her face: shock, guilt, something he couldn't quite place, and then, just as quickly, she turned away. The weight of the moment was unbearable. He had never expected to feel this again, not with her, not after everything that had happened. But here he was, sitting in front of his girlfriend, who was still unaware of the storm inside him, and yet, the boy across the room, with his face, his eyes, was a question that couldn't be ignored. Why hadn't Claire told him? Why hadn't she shared this with him all those years ago when they were still married? Was this child the result of their broken marriage? A consequence of something he had never seen? Had she cheated on him? Or was this child really his? His grip tightened on his wine glass as his thoughts spiraled. His world had always been defined by control, business deals, market trends, investments. But now, he had no answers. He had only questions. And the one thing he had always wanted, a family, a legacy, was suddenly at the center of it all, tangled in a web of confusion. Back at the table, Lily continued speaking, unaware of the turmoil inside him. He forced a smile, pretending to listen, but his mind was miles away. The weight of what he had just seen, the child, Claire, the unspoken truth that lingered in the air, was too much to ignore. He had to find out the truth. He had to know if that child was his. Because if it was, everything he thought he knew about his life, about his future, was about to change forever. When Lily excused herself to take a phone call, Maxwell stood up, his movements deliberate as he made his way through the bustling restaurant. His stride was purposeful, a man used to getting what he wanted. His path led him straight to Claire, who was balancing a tray with practiced ease, her face unreadable. "Claire," Maxwell called, his voice firm. She stiffened, but didn't turn immediately. It wasn't until she set the tray down that she finally met his gaze. Her expression was guarded, her lips pressed into a tight line. "Maxwell," she acknowledged, her voice distant and cold. His eyes shifted toward the boy still seated at the table. His heart began to race. "Is he mine?" A long silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken words. Then Claire let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. "You don't get to ask that," she said, her voice low and sharp. Maxwell stood frozen, his mind swirling with 1,000 questions, but before he could ask another word, a man approached the table where the child sat. The man smiled, lifting the boy effortlessly into his arms, and as he turned toward Claire, she returned his smile warmly. The sight hit Maxwell like a physical blow. He paused, his feet rooted to the ground. Claire, who had once been his everything, now seemed to be a stranger. The warmth between her and the man was undeniable, and the child, who looked so much like him, seemed completely at ease in the man's arms. Maxwell's chest tightened, and his heart skipped a beat. He wanted to approach, to demand answers, but the man's presence made it impossible. Claire looked happy, and the moment felt more complicated than ever. Maxwell couldn't bring himself to confront her now, especially with the child in tow and the man so clearly part of her life. Unable to move, he stepped back, his mind spinning with uncertainty. His emotions were in turmoil. Maxwell left the restaurant, his mind still racing after the unsettling encounter. The image of Claire smiling at the man who lifted the boy, who looked so much like him, kept replaying in his mind. He couldn't shake the feeling that his life was suddenly spinning out of control. As he and Lily drove home, the silence between them felt heavy. Lily noticed his distant demeanor, but didn't press him, sensing he needed space. Maxwell's mind was elsewhere, consumed with questions. Who was that child? Was he really mine? When they got home, Maxwell immediately retreated to his office, needing to focus. Lily made dinner in the kitchen, unaware of the turmoil swirling in his mind. He couldn't stop thinking about the boy, the way he looked, the way he had stared at him across the room. Why hadn't Claire told him? Maxwell grabbed his phone and quickly typed a message to Dr. Harrison, the family doctor he trusted. He needed answers, and he needed them now. "Dr. Harrison, I need you to gather any details you can about Claire Williams, her whereabouts, her background, and if she has a child. I need everything you can find." A few moments later, the doctor responded, "I'll get back to you shortly with what I can find." Maxwell paced the room, his mind still consumed with the boy. If the child is mine, what does that mean for everything I've worked for? What happens now? Just as he was sinking into his thoughts, his phone buzzed again. It was Dr. Harrison. The message was short, but it gave Maxwell the clarity he needed. Claire Williams moved to the city a little over a year ago. Before that, she was in Denver, where she was working at a design agency. She's been employed at a local restaurant, the Golden Vine, for the last 10 months. As for a child, there's no listed father in any of her records, but there is a young child she's been seen with, a boy around 2 years old, no father mentioned in the birth details. Maxwell's heart raced. The child was 2 years old. Could it be mine? He stared at the message, his mind whirling with questions, doubts, and fears. But there was no clear answer yet. He had to confront Claire to find out if the child was truly his, but a part of him hesitated. The weight of the situation was too heavy, and Lily couldn't know yet. Maxwell sighed, frustrated. He had no answers, only more questions. But one thing was certain. He had to find out the truth. For the first time in his life, Maxwell found himself at a loss. That night, he didn't go home. Instead, he parked outside Amaretto, the restaurant where Claire worked, waiting in the shadows as she finished her shift. The street was quiet, the glow of streetlights casting long shadows as she locked the door and walked briskly toward her apartment. Maxwell had been here before, watching, wondering, and tonight he was done waiting. Claire turned the corner and he followed, his footsteps light but purposeful. When she reached her apartment, he quickened his pace. Just as she slipped the key into the lock, he spoke. "Are you ever going to stop hiding from me?" Claire stiffened. Slowly, she turned. Her face was a mask of calm, but her grip on the key tightened. "What are you doing here, Maxwell?" His eyes searched hers. "You know why." She scoffed, pushing the door open. "Go home." But before she could step inside, he caught the door frame, keeping it open. "Number not until you tell me the truth." Claire's jaw clenched. "There is no truth to tell." Maxwell's voice lowered, his tone heavy. "Ben is mine, isn't he?" A beat of silence. Claire didn't flinch, but he saw the flicker in her eyes. She recovered quickly, her lips curving into something almost amused. "You're delusional." Maxwell's grip tightened on the frame. "Don't do that. Don't lie to my face." Claire folded her arms, tilting her head. "You think just because he looks like you, he's yours?" His heart pounded. "He is mine." "No, he isn't." Maxwell let out a sharp breath. "Then whose is he?" Claire's expression didn't waver. "Someone else's." The words hit him like a gut punch. He had been prepared for anger, for regret, even for hatred, but not this. She was still lying to him. "Why?" Claire saw the hesitation flash in his eyes and seized it. "Stay away from us, Maxwell," she whispered, "for his sake." And with that, she shut the door in his face. The next day, Maxwell showed up at Amaretto. He hadn't planned to. He had told himself to walk away, to respect Claire's choice. But when he closed his eyes, all he could see was that little boy's face, Ben's face, his face. So he watched from a distance as Claire moved through the restaurant, her posture controlled, her expression unreadable. And then he saw Ben. The boy sat at a corner table, playing absent-mindedly with a small toy car. The furrow in his brow, the way his lips pressed together in deep concentration. Maxwell had seen that same look staring back at him in the mirror. His heart clenched. Claire had lied. When she finally noticed him, her entire body tensed. She set down her tray and stormed toward him. "Are you insane?" she hissed. Maxwell exhaled sharply. "I just want to talk to him." Claire's nostrils flared. "You don't get to do that. He's my son, Claire." She let out a short laugh. "No, he isn't." Maxwell's fists clenched. "Damn it, stop lying." Several heads turned toward them, but Claire didn't care. She lowered her voice, but the anger in it remained. "You do not get to come here and disrupt his life." Maxwell looked over at Ben again, his heart aching. "I just want to know him." Claire's eyes softened, just for a second. Then she shook her head. "You don't get to pick and choose when you want to be a father." "I never had a choice," Maxwell shot back. Claire let out a breath. "Well, now you do, and I'm telling you to walk away." But Maxwell didn't move. He couldn't, because for the first time in his life, walking away felt impossible. That night, Maxwell lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Beside him, Lily stirred in her sleep, her hand resting over the slight curve of her pregnant belly. His fiancée, his soon-to-be wife, the woman carrying his child. Maxwell looked down at the engagement ring on her finger, twisting the band slightly. He should be happy. He had everything. A growing business, a beautiful woman, a child on the way. But all he could think about was Ben, and the fact that, no matter how much Claire tried to push him away, he wasn't going anywhere. Maxwell refused to walk away. Claire made it difficult, shutting him out at every turn. She ignored his calls, kept her answers short whenever he showed up, and kept a tight leash on Ben. But none of it changed the undeniable truth. Ben liked him. It started with small things. At first, Ben was wary, watching Maxwell with careful curiosity, but Maxwell was patient. He didn't push. Instead, he let Ben come to him. He showed up at Claire's house, offering to help her with anything she needed. He played along when Ben shyly showed him a drawing, nodding in admiration. Then, one evening, as Claire wiped down the counters in the kitchen, she turned to see Ben curled up against Maxwell's chest, his tiny fingers gripping his shirt. Her breath hitched. Maxwell sat completely still, his arms cradling the boy, his face unreadable. He looked down at Ben as though he were holding the world. When Claire walked over, Maxwell carefully adjusted Ben in his arms, carrying him with ease. "He fell asleep on me," he murmured. Claire swallowed hard. "I'll put him to bed." But before she could take him, Maxwell shook his head. "I got it." She watched as he carried Ben to his small bed, tucking the blanket around him. He brushed back his son's hair, lingering for a moment before stepping away. Claire crossed her arms, watching him. "You're really serious about this, aren't you?" Maxwell turned to her. "I have to be." Her expression hardened. "Do you regret leaving?" Maxwell exhaled, rubbing his face. "Every damn day." Claire hesitated, then her voice dropped lower. "I found out I was pregnant after you left." His head snapped up, eyes wide. "What?" "I had a cryptic pregnancy, no symptoms, no idea I was carrying him until it was almost too late," she admitted. Maxwell's throat tightened. She had gone through all of this alone. His voice was hoarse. "Why didn't you call me?" Claire let out a bitter laugh. "For what, Maxwell? You made it clear where you stood when you walked out of my life." Maxwell's chest ached. "I never stopped loving you." Her lips parted slightly in surprise, but she quickly masked it. "What about your fiancée, the woman carrying your child? What are you going to do about her?" Maxwell was silent for a long time. He didn't have an answer. Maxwell hadn't planned on lying to Lily, but the more time he spent with Claire and Ben, the more he avoided the woman waiting for him at home. Until one night, when everything fell apart, Maxwell walked through the front door of his penthouse, feeling drained. He hadn't even made it 2 steps inside when a wine glass shattered against the wall beside him. "What the hell is wrong with you, Maxwell?" Lily stood in the middle of the living room, her face twisted in rage. Maxwell sighed. He knew this was coming. "Lily, calm down." "Calm down?" she shrieked. "I call you, you don't answer. You come home late every night. I had to find out from someone else that you've been with her, your ex-wife." Maxwell pinched the bridge of his nose. "Claire is the mother of my son." "Your what?" Lily's face paled, and Maxwell realized his mistake. She hadn't known. Her voice was barely a whisper. "You knew all this time and never told me?" Maxwell ran a hand down his face. "It's complicated." Lily's body trembled. "No, it's not. You lied. You used me, Maxwell. You didn't want a wife. You wanted a child." Her voice cracked, her hands clutching her stomach. "I thought we were building a life together. But the truth is, you never loved me, did you?" Maxwell's jaw tightened. He opened his mouth, but no words came. Lily let out a broken laugh. "That's what I thought." She threw the engagement ring at him. "Get out." Maxwell filed for a quick divorce, making sure Lily and the baby were financially secure. He had failed her, and he knew it. But his heart had never truly belonged to her. It had always been Claire. And now, he was free to prove it. But Claire wasn't impressed. "You left her just like you left me," she said, arms crossed as she stood in her doorway. Maxwell's patience snapped. "That's not fair, Claire." Claire let out a sharp breath. "No, Maxwell. What's not fair is you thinking money fixes everything." His shoulders tensed. "I'm not trying to throw money at this." Claire shook her head. You still don't get it, do you? Maxwell frowned. Claire, I don't trust you. Her words cut through him like a blade. Maxwell stared at her, his chest tightening. I love you. Claire exhaled shakily. Maybe you do. But love isn't enough. Not anymore. His hands curled into fists. Then what the hell do I have to do? Claire's voice softened. You need to show up, not with money, not with grand gestures, but by being here, consistently. No more running, Maxwell. Maxwell swallowed hard. And if I do? Claire hesitated, then whispered, Then maybe, someday, I'll believe you. Maxwell let out a slow breath. For the first time in his life, he realized money couldn't fix this. The only way to win Claire back was to earn her trust. And that would be the hardest battle of his life. Do you think Maxwell will win back Claire's trust, or is it too late for redemption? Will his love for Ben be enough to fix everything? Subscribe, like, and comment below with your thoughts. Part 2 is coming soon.